Sufferers and their families can have their rights respected, can be treated with the equality and with the dignity that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matias. Thank you, Commissioner, and others. The debate is closed. The vote is tomorrow at 12:30. We now come to question time, and we are 28 minutes late. We'll try and get as much in as we can. And the first question, when Mr. Hahn is ready, is question 14 on the utilisation of European funds by Mr. Răzducean Niculescu. And when the Commissioner is ready, he can give his answer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members, the Commission welcomes the Financial Times scrutiny as it represents an important contribution to open and broaden public debate about the efficiency and effectiveness of cohesion policy. The Commission is aware of the habitual slower take-up at the beginning of a programming period. However, the most updated data shows that the Commission made more cohesion policy payments in the fourth quarter of 2010 than ever before. The vast majority of the payments made were interim payments, meaning that they are reimbursements of expenditure already made and certified in the Member States. Thus, it is certain that, as it has been seen in previous programming periods, cohesion policy spending is accelerating. The absorption in terms of EU payments to Member States is now at 21% for the Cohesion Fund, 22% for the European Regional Development Fund (ERDF) and 23% for the European Social Fund (ESF). As regards support provided to multinational and large companies, the Commission underlines that the primary objective of cohesion policy is growth and the creation of new jobs for particular regions and Member States. Any support for productive investment has to be seen in this context. Promoting job creation and economic growth can be achieved in many ways, from the setting up of small enterprises to supporting larger companies. Cohesion policy interventions support productive investments, which is primarily targeted at small and medium sized enterprises, as specified by the ERDF and ESF regulations. The Commission also stressed the role of small and medium sized enterprises during the negotiations of the current programming documents. Therefore, a vast majority of productive investments and investments in the development of endogenous potential is targeted at SMEs. However, there may be cases in line with the regulations where co-financing is granted to larger companies, provided this complies with the objectives of the funds and the programmes concerned. In total, cohesion policy has allocated some €55 billion between 2007 and 2013 to business support, a large share of which supports innovation in SMEs. The Commission would like to point out that multinationals are not beneficiaries of the support extended by the ESF. Workers receive the co-financed training. The ESF supports people. It is about providing training, retraining and improving skills to prepare and help people find a job. A worker engaged in a given enterprise may well find himself or herself engaged in another company. Therefore, what matters is the skill capital workers manage to build to sustain their inclusion in the labour market, and not the name or type of enterprises providing the training. The Commission considers that, from a policy perspective, firms should not receive European funding for investments which would lead to the loss of employment by the same company in another region of the European Union, as the net effect of the fund's investment might be zero or even negative. In case a company which has received cohesion policy support winds down or closes the supported project within 5 years or 3 years in case of SMEs, these funds need to be paid back. And the final point, but it is a crucial one, while there are clearly areas for improvement, this cannot and should not overweight the major positive impact that cohesion policy is having. I would like to assure you that the Commission is not shying away from the problems, and we have indeed in the past proposed changes, some of which were taken up, and we will continue to drive improvement of cohesion policy. Cohesion policy brings clear benefits to the poor regions of the European Union, but is also clearly benefiting the rest of Europe. Thank you so far.
Thank you. I'm trying to give everybody a chance. I'm going to give Mr. Niculescu the floor first, then Mr. Rubig, then Mrs. Blinkovich-Ute. Mr. Balchitis, we'll get to your question later on. So, first, Mr. Niculescu.
Thank you very much, President. I thank the Commissioner for the quality of the information in his answer, but I would also like to say that in such a debate, when we talk about these things, we should stress the future measures in order to avoid similar situations. And, if I may, we should ask ourselves if such results, when brought to the public, are not detrimental to the confidence of citizens in the European Union. Thank you.
Rubig.
Ja, danke, Herr Präsident, sehr geehrter Kommissar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, let me first of all thank you for the light that you've shed. I think that's always the basis for a reasonable discussion, and also the clear recognition of your duty to SMEs, because 2/3 of jobs in Europe depend on them and 80% of tax is paid by them. Which brings me to my question. Do you think that in the future the research infrastructure and the research framework conditions connected with this program can be somewhat strengthened?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for the reply. My question is as follows. The funds of the structural funds, especially those of the social fund, meant for improving employees' qualification and keeping the jobs, is very important. However, do you think that international rich corporations have the same conditions as SMEs, because they have to contribute with their own part in order to receive the money from the structural funds? Do you think that there might be certain suggestions that large companies and small companies should get equal conditions?
Have the floor. Commissioner?
Thank
you for those questions. First of all, research infrastructure. When you're in the area of innovation, then small and medium-sized enterprises already receive considerable resources from the EDF. High double figures of millions in the period 2000-2006. I think there was more than 30,000 companies which received focused assistance in this area. And we consequently think that the research structure is very important and will be very important in the future. Over and above the economic area and going into basic research. In the current period, we will probably be setting up a research infrastructure project which for the first time will have resources attached to it, because the research leading up to this project suggested that it would have a very sustained effect in a region over and above the project itself, in terms of the jobs that would be created, not just jobs for researchers, but jobs in supplying companies that, I mean, you need suppliers, you need services even in basic research. So in a specific research, in a specific region, you can set up a genuine hub for this kind of research, and that would also be a signal for the next research period. You could have even research universities, and that would that in turn would have spin-off effects. So all of this ends up being good for the economy and good for lasting jobs. Now to the honourable lady's question. in the European Social Fund, almost always, the temporarily unemployed people are trained in order to be in a position to improve their chances on the labour market, either within the company where they are already employed, or if they are unemployed, in order to improve their skills and qualifications, or simply to improve their chances of getting a different job. Let me give you an example. One often hears criticism that further training was offered to McDonald's staff. What you have to see was that this was training for McDonald's workers in order to get better jobs, in order to be able to apply for better jobs. It's often criticized that these Mac jobs, as they're called, are part-time jobs, don't require great skills, that they're things that are very often done by students. But the whole point is to make those people more highly qualified. And in this case of this project, McDonald's paid all the costs of the project. So further training of employed staff is intended to make them more employable, make them more highly qualified. The aim is not to concentrate on people, on where people are in jobs. The aim always is to improve existing qualifications and to make people qualified or more qualified to deal with an ever more mobile labour market, so that is not conditional on unemployment.
The question by Mrs. Gunks, number 16, on European Progress Microfinance Facility. When the Commissioner is ready, he has the floor.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I am pleased to report that both parts of the European Progress Microfinance Facility, the guarantees part and the cash products part, are now entirely operational. Only 3 months after the entry into force of the decision, the Commission finalised the mandate for the European Investment Fund to launch the guarantee operations for microfinance providers. Last November, the Commission established a specialised investment vehicle. As a result, the first microloans will be provided starting from this month. I am also pleased to report that the Commission has been successful in securing additional funding for micro entrepreneurs in Europe. Indeed, the European Investment Bank will match the European Union's contribution of €100 million, and further contributors are expected. As a result, the overall volume of loans under the Progress Microfinance Facility will amount, as planned, to around €500 million. This money will benefit unemployed people, people facing social exclusion, or vulnerable persons who face difficulties in accessing the conventional credit market. Ensuring outreach to these target groups and promoting geographical balance are key elements of the mandate given by the Commission to the European Investment Fund. Operations approved so far or under preparation suggest that both objectives will be met. As from early 2011, microloans will be provided through a start-up microfinance institution in Belgium, which focuses on disadvantaged urban communities, and through a foundation in the Netherlands, which targets individuals with no access to conventional finance. The EFF has announced that the operations being prepared will also be balanced in terms of geographical coverage. About 40% are expected to involve intermediaries in Western Europe and about 60% in Central and Eastern Europe. It is well known that microfinance is most effective if business starters and micro enterprises are accompanied through business support services. As such, the Commission will undertake measures to support European Social Fund managing authorities and intermediate bodies to step up promotion of self employment and micro enterprises. For the current ESF programming period, the Member States have earmarked more than €2.7 billion to promote entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs can also be supported through interest rebates. However, whether or not interest rebates are subsidised through the ESF is a decision to be taken by the individual Member States. At present, only one Member State, namely Lithuania, has indicated that it makes use of this possibility. Lastly, the Commission will promote information about the Progress Microfinance Facility. The microfinance providers who are closest to the target beneficiaries will provide information on the availability of microloans. The Commission will make use of existing networks of public employment services, ESF managing authorities and NGOs to provide information on the Progress Microfinance Facility. Last but not least, the Youth on the Move campaign will pay special attention to opportunities for young people from different backgrounds to start up their own businesses and receive microloans. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Balčytis, we're coming to your question next. No, next. Mr. Balčytis, next. Sorry.
I would like to ask on this question.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got three supplementaries on this already. We've got Mrs. Gunks, then Mr. Zemke, and Mrs. Tickow. Before you asked, I'm sorry. We're coming to you next. Mrs. Gunks.
Thank you, President. I'm glad to listen to the Commissioner's report. A few weeks ago, we received a report from the European Investment Funds and from the Commission. Then the figure was around 200 and something million euros. So my question was that because originally 500 million euros were budgeted, then how come you had additional resources? I think it is very important because in mitigating the impacts of the crisis, we need this program. Therefore, we accelerated its adoption then. The other question was that from the ESF, if you could have interest subsidies or training and mentoring subsidies. These were parts of the original design, but then the Commission seems to have somewhat neglected these elements. And it is extremely important to have the information to trickle down to the people, to the most vulnerable.
Panie komisarzu, chciałem panu podziękować za informację.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Well, thank you very much for your report. I entirely agree. The instrument that we are talking about today is very important indeed, but we must also answer the following question. Which countries actually use the microfinancing instrument? What I found worrying in your statement is that we must make sure that there is an equal geographic spread. So my question is, what countries actually use this instrument? Thank you.
Oh, half a minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Domnule Comisar.
Commissioner, it's true that the young people are most affected by the economic and financial crisis, but we should not forget people that are older than 40 and that are unemployed. You mentioned the fact that 60% of this instrument is going to be directed towards the central and eastern parts of the European Union. Have you identified the barriers against the use of this instrument in these parts of Europe? Thank you.
You have the floor. Commissioner?
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much for your interest and for your positions on microfinance. This is a matter that is dealt with in many different directorates general. Mr. Andor takes the lead, but I also take take an interest in the subject because of regional policy. As regards the aims, there are several member states who have introduced an upper limit which is between 8 and 9.5%. Though you have also to remember, and this was a big issue when the whole subject was being prepared, overall the costs attached to the loans are relatively high, so a middle way has to be found, which I think has been done successfully. On the second question, I can tell the House that the Jasmine instrument, which is intended to prepare microfinance and to train intermediaries, has now prepared 15 institutions in 15 different countries. This is done in a decentralized way. This is in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as in Western Europe. I can't remember all the countries, but most of the new accession countries are already included in that list, and next year a further 20 intermediaries are going to be trained through the Jasmine program. As to the last question, I'm afraid I can't answer off the cuff. I'll have to give you a written reply which will contain detailed description of the grounds. But I imagine that as often there is a communication problem here. There are very often obstacles when many of the potential creditors are people who can't get a loan from a normal bank. There's a certain sort of reserve or fear that has to be overcome in people like that. But once that is done, then good results can be expected.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner, so much. We now move to question 15 by Mr. Balčitis, and Commissioner Tajani is going to reply once he's ready. Benvenuto.
Signor Presidente,
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the European tourism industry, like many others, has to face up to the ever greater challenge of globalization. And this is a challenge which the Commissioner has already stressed and addressed on a number of occasions, particularly in its communication industrial policy in the area of globalization. And what's more, on the 30th of June last year, the Commission passed a specific communication on tourism, which, in line with the Lisbon Treaty, puts forward a new consolidated framework to strengthen the competitiveness of the industry, with the idea being to make European tourism a genuinely competitive, modern, stable and responsible industry. A favourable context for SMEs and one-man companies, one-person companies in tourism is also part of this framework. In order to meet this objective, we specify 3 actions. First, to encourage the competitiveness of the tourism industry within the Union. Secondly, to foster the development of sustainable tourism, responsible quality tourism. And thirdly, to consolidate the image and the profile of Europe as a set of sustainable quality tourist destinations. And of course, we need to exploit all the potential of the financial instruments available to the Union to develop tourism. Initiatives that to be promoted will have to give the industry the instruments so that it can adapt to the challenge that faces it, and also so that it can develop in a sustainable and competitive way. Specific measures, implementing measures, will be brought forward to promote innovation in tourism, to encourage quality, to improve quality in tourism, and to strengthen the skills of the staff in tourism. As we cannot any longer regard tourism as an industry run entirely by families. We have to think of a more modern and a more competitive form of tourism. Let me give you a few examples of professional training that we have in mind. A way of adapting companies to information technology, thus making them more competitiveness. All of these proposals, incidentally, are to be included in the Commission's communication, which is being debated in Parliament. The rapporteur is present here this evening. Better use of the different community programs like Leonardo or the Competitiveness Framework Program, Erasmus for Young Businessmen, the European Social Fund, other programs. And also there is a strategy to promote the offer of a broad spectrum of a broad palette of forms of tourism. And equally, we will be trying to create, in other ways, a favourable context. It also needs to be recalled that SMEs can benefit from other horizontal offers of finance. For example, Jeremy, which is a joint initiative by the Commission and the European Investment Bank, which intends to improve access of SMEs to finance through venture capital, loans and loan guarantees. And lastly, I'd remind the House that for SMEs in the tourism sector, they are fully entitled to benefit from the measures that intend to improve the operational context for SMEs, and Parliament will be receiving the updated text on these measures in the next few weeks. So the Small Business Act is also going to be able to protect and encourage SMEs in tourism, which have a remarkable potential to develop a sector that has to develop in the next few years. And I'm absolutely convinced that a European policy, as envisaged in the treaty, can represent added value on top of the work that the European regions and member states are already excellently doing. So I'd like to assure the questioner that the Commission and I myself am committed to ensure that all SMEs can be supported and can be given better and easier access to community financial instruments in the overall context of a strategy that wants to make tourism into a linchpin of our industry.
Then Mr. Fidanza, then Mrs. Ticau. Mr. Balčytis.
Grazie Presidente, ringrazio il collega Balčytis per questa
Thank you.
Then you. Yeah. And then Mrs. Ticau.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I would like to thank you for such a comprehensive reply. And everyone who has gathered here today hopes that the forecasts that you have mentioned in relation to the development of tourism will come into reality in the future, and this sector will be attractive for investors as well. As you know, tourism industry is not equally developed in the EU. This has subjective and objective reasons for this. I would like to ask you one question. We have the Baltic Sea strategy, and the attractiveness of the Baltic Sea region is mentioned as one of the main strategic aims. What has been achieved in this area during these years? Thank you.
Adesso tocca a me. Grazie, Presidente.
Yes, now it is my turn. Sorry for the last time, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm grateful to Mr. Balčytis for his question, which centres our debate on questions which we'll be addressing in the next few months with the report that I am drawing up. First of all, I'm grateful to Vice President Tajani for the very strong impulse that he's given to the new European tourism policy that is contained in that is envisaged in the Lisbon Treaty with the communication from June and the implementing plan tabled only a few weeks ago. These two things concentrate attention on SMEs as a contribution to the competitiveness of the sector, particularly as regards innovation and training. On finance, there are two lines to act on. First of all, we need to make the existing funds more available and more easy to recognise. And secondly, Parliament, I'm concluding, President, there are 14 million specific inventions for tourism policy.
Seconds for supplementaries. Mrs. Ticau, she's experienced, she knows. 30 seconds.
Domnule comisar.
Thank you, President. Mr. Commissioner, there are some countries which use the regional program for competitiveness and innovation. The UK or Greece make use of this program. They also use the operational program for regional development. I would like to ask you if you envisage the creation of a European framework in order to improve the participation of SMEs in accessing European funds for tourism. Thank you.
Commissioner, you have the floor.
Grazie onorevole Presidente. Io voglio ringraziare l'onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm grateful to Mr. Balčytis because he gives me a chance to speak about a subject that I'm particularly keen on among the subjects that I'm responsible for in the Commission. Tourism, together with space and industrial policies, are my priorities. Now, to respond more precisely to your question, over and above the policy initiatives that I've been pursuing ever since I became Commissioner, one of these things is what Mr. Fidanza mentioned. When there wasn't a community policy for tourism, community competence for tourism before the Lisbon Treaty, there weren't the necessary funds to provide community assistance for a major tourist action. There were things like Calypso, there were regional initiatives in Spain, and all of these were good things. But if I've understood right Mr. Fidanza's message, in the report that he will be putting to Parliament, there's going to be support for the idea that the next financial perspectives should increase funds for tourism policy, and that could then be fitted into the 8th Framework Research Programme or Framework Programme with a relevant budget line. But of course it's difficult to give specific replies as long as you don't have a financial instrument available to you. Having said that, of course, we will still move in a very determined way. Now, as you know, a great many initiatives have already been adopted. The Belgian presidency organised a major event and the Hungarian presidency is going to organise a major event. And a few days ago we had a first discussion in Budapest about it. And I'm also happy that Mr. Balčytis raised the issue of tourism in the Baltic. Tourism is not just a matter for Mediterranean countries, Spain, France, Italy, Greece and Malta. It's a very important resource for the whole of the European Union, including for the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which have beauties and have a potential that can be developed. And as regards the Baltic countries, one of the subjects that needs to be, is addressed in the text approved on the 30th of June last year, is the new middle class in the Russian Federation, which is millions and millions of people who now want to embark on tourism. They want to, in other words, leave their own country. For that purpose, of course, there are visa problems, as there are with China. But the European Commission's desire and the Ministers for Tourism's desire is to solve this problem in terms of the Russian tourism potential as well as the Chinese potential, in order faster to ensure that we can receive in our countries, and the Baltic countries of course are nearest to the Russian Federation, so they can expect to receive a lot of tourist visits from this emerging middle class, which should bring them economic advantage. This is in the centre of our work in favour of tourism, and I'm happy to note that many ministers of different countries, a few weeks ago in London I met the new British tourism minister. I'm happy to note that even Great Britain as well is committed to support the new union tourism policy. So is France. We'd have to identify some entry ports, and there are things that Commissioner Vassiliou wanted to put in the text today, approved today, about sport. For example, there's the big Olympic opportunity coming up in London, which has to be seen as a major European opportunity. In other words, we need to see that every European country has a port where tourists can enter, and then they can visit the country, and having done that they can move on to other European countries. That's the added value that the Commission can offer, and Parliament's support will be decisive, I believe. And I'm grateful for your attention, particularly for the future debate on tourism policy and also on the budgetary side of that.
Commissioner, and we now move to questions to Mrs. Vassiliou, and the first one is by Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė. When the Commissioner is ready, number 17, programmes and initiatives to modernise higher education. Commissioner, when you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President. Well, let me say that education is one of the major factors that determines employability. The risk of being unemployed is 40% lower for higher education graduates than for people with only secondary education. However, youth unemployment and underemployment are unacceptably high today. Too many graduates struggle to make the transition to the labour market and secure quality employment that corresponds to their educational background. Of course, the efforts to improve employability begin well before higher education. The Commission works with Member States to identify the skills or key competences that young people need to learn at school. Today, young people need a wider range of skills than ever before in order to flourish in a globalised economy. Many will work in jobs that do not yet exist. Many will need advanced linguistic, intercultural and entrepreneurial skills. Technology will continue to change the world in ways we cannot imagine. So the ability to continue to learn and to innovate will become crucial factors for employability. Guidance is also critical. Young people are confronted with an increased number of educational choices. They need to be able to take informed decisions. This requires better information about education and training paths, including a clear picture of job opportunities. We need to develop quality career guidance services and vocational orientation with the strong involvement of labour market institutions. Now, turning to higher education, the Commission recently launched, as you know, the Youth on the Move, a Europe 2020 flagship initiative which sets out to make education and training more relevant to young people's needs. We are now starting to implement the various parts of this strategy. Later this year, the Commission plans to present a new communication on the modernisation of higher education. We will take stock of progress in making higher education more relevant to the needs of the knowledge based society, including the question of employability. We will identify the key challenges for the future and set out our response. As part of these efforts, the Commission will reinforce the European platform for dialogue between universities and business, with a view to increasing the employability of students and to developing the role of education in the knowledge triangle. In a more global and mobile world, transparency regarding the performance of higher education institutions can stimulate both competition and cooperation and be an incentive for further improvements and modernisation. However, existing international rankings can give an incomplete picture of the performance of universities. This year, the Commission will present the results of a feasibility study to develop an alternative multidimensional ranking system which reflects the diversity of higher education institutions. Europe needs to be better at anticipating the skills needs of tomorrow. This is why the Commission has launched the Agenda for New Skills and Jobs, which goes hand in hand with our Youth on the Move initiative. New Skills and Jobs looks at how to help our young people to become more employable. Above all, we need to give people the right mix of skills so that they can adapt to our fast changing society. Our new EU Skills Panorama, which will be operational in 2012, will help to forecast not only the skills that employers need today, but also those required in the future. In the spring of this year, the Commission intends to propose new European benchmarks on learning mobility and on the role of education in preparing people to be employable in the knowledge based labour market. Finally, EU programmes to support education, training and youth, including mobility programmes such as Erasmus, can help young people to improve their chances in the labour market by gaining valuable international experience and by developing their intellectual understanding. Thank you, President.
Thank you. Now, 30 seconds each, please. Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė, Mr. Zemke and Mr. Papanikolaou. Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė.
Thank you, Commissioner, for a comprehensive reply. I would like to ask an additional question. The EU should guarantee the right to quality education to all citizens. However, there are big differences in the member states among the higher education systems, its prices, and the system of granting loans for paying the studies. There are high interest rates on those loans and very unattractive loan repayment conditions, which frequently deter young people from aspiring for higher education in their own countries, and this is the brain drain to other countries. Does the Commission recommend drafting the recommendations of the most attractive conditions for loan granting for students?
Jedną kwestię, chociaż tutaj można by mówić o wielu różnych sprawach.
Well, one question from me, although many different topics could potentially be discussed. My question is the following. Are you actually going to perhaps increase the funding available for the exchange of young people in Europe. For the past few years, the funds available for Erasmus and other programs is constant, and these grants are quite low. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. It is true, Madam Commissioner, that this specific issue falls under the principle of subsidiarity. However, the Member States do get funding from the EU in order to modernise education syllabuses. Let me remind you that the third support framework fund meant that they took up such funds. Does the Commission have statistics on how effective these funds have been and on future funds as well?
First of all, on the question of the disparities between higher education institutes, exactly, and that is why we want to have transparency in the records of universities, and that is why we are completing now the study, the feasibility study, on the basis of which we shall dare to look into the ranking of universities, mapping of universities, standards of universities, in order to give the students more informed choices.